viewed. Earlier we heard about how we need to think about the lungs of large whales about the size of a person. Well, I think you could also think of lungs of large whales of the size of a super small cetacean, porpoises. So Anna Hall is our next speaker.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. I'm here to talk to you. Here to talk to you about the super small cetaceans and the medium-sized superstars. And so, because there's a timer on with 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts, please. We are going to circumnavigate the North Pacific Ocean in the next 4 minutes, 56 seconds. Okay. So, starting at the United Nations, why not? There's a big push around the world to reach these sustainable development goals. And the one that a lot of my work falls into is Sustainable Development Goal number 14, obviously with life below the water. And there's a lot of components to this, but in a nutshell, it's about conservation and it's about sustainable use of resources within the ocean. And these are two very, very important pieces, whether we're talking about small cetaceans or medium-sized cetaceans or even large cetaceans. I spend a great deal of time at sea, and I spend a lot of time watching animals, trying to decide what it is that they're telling me. And not because we're trying to, communicate telepathically with them, but what they're telling me about their needs, their ecological and their habitat needs. And that's based on where they are, how many of them are in the group, how many groups there are there any communications that are going on between the groups, what types of behaviors do we see, and what types of responses do we see from perhaps human activities or even other animals' activities. So, I always try to think about what is it that these animals are trying to tell us? Oh, we've got a little bit of something happened to the formatting there. Let's see what's on the next one. Yeah, get it right. We do try. And I suspect that these animals are terribly polite. But in all seriousness, I spent a huge amount of time trying to decide what are the animals telling us? What do they need from us as people? Because we've had a huge influence on our oceans. Back in around 1900, it was said in England, as I've mentioned before, that harbor porpoise were seen to occupy knee-deep waters, and mothers would bring their calves into these locations. So that has me thinking, here, what has changed? Because, we can't go back in time, but we can look at maps. And just as an example, this is the Victoria Harbour. It was mapped in 1853. Here's our Google rendition from 2014. It's profoundly different. We can see that there's a mouse. We can see that the islands in the middle, in the mid-1800s, hardly exist. We can see that this very complicated shoreline has been smoothed and extended. The harbor here, which used to extend into mudflats, is now greatly shortened. The width between these two pieces of land is much narrower than it was. And again, we see that the shoreline is far less complicated. We also know that there are new structures, for instance, these berths and the breakwater that simply didn't exist less than 200 years ago. Now, I can't tell you what harbor porpoise were doing in this region 200 years ago, but given the name harbor porpoise, I would say that we've got a pretty high likelihood that they were in this region. We also know that in the 1950s, they were able to be seen from shore in the Victoria region. And these days you cannot. You must go out at least 5 miles. So we've had some big changes. But we also know that these changes are limited in space and time. And there are regions on a BC coast where harbor porpoise can still be seen in the nearshore habitat. You can see the grass in the foreground here, and this is research done by the Porpoise Conservation Society. We have 2 land-based sites, one Queen Charlotte Channel and the other at Saturna Island. And we have determined that we have interannual occurrence of harbor porpoise moving into these shallow habitats. We're seeing a number of different behaviors, including mating, foraging, calves, and occasionally they do poke their little heads above the water. And so we get to have a better look at these super small cetaceans. So transiting across the North Pacific to China, where there is another super small cetacean that is in trouble, but we have a vastly different conservation program going. This is the finless porpoise, Yangtze finless porpoise. There is a captive breeding program with fantastic research facilities and enormous oxbow lakes that have got nurseries and medical facilities. And the scale of these oxbow lakes is very difficult to convey, but all I can say is when I'm out in Juan de Fuca Strait and I look down the channel, it reminds me of the reserves that are set up for Yangtze finless porpoise. In 2021, the Chinese government enacted a 10-year fishing ban so that the Yangtze finless porpoise is not competing for fish with humans. They can hopefully rebound their population a little bit, be taken from these reserves into the Yangtze River and perhaps repopulate. China admitted that they failed Baiji, which was determined to be extinct in around 2007, very sadly, but they are doing their very best not to fail Yangtze finless porpoise. And you can see here, this is the shore of the Yangtze River. It is vastly changed, but China is taking some very tremendous steps to try and save this species. And they have had successful captive breeding with calves born successfully since 2005. So there are some real amazing conservation actions taking place. COVID has unfortunately, of course, changed our world, and we haven't been able to get back to Wuhan, where the captive breeding facility is, but we're certainly trying to provide as much support externally as possible. Interestingly, in China, Yangtze finless porpoise, known as the smiling angels of the Yangtze River, good media spin, they are reported regularly in the media. Lucky for Yangtze finless porpoise, they do not have any medium-sized media superstars living nearby, as we do here in British Columbia. The work here on killer whales is based on research, monitoring, mitigation, repeat. Last year, I spent 70 days at sea with the Department of National Defense. I've been working with them since 2017, doing just this, research, monitoring, and mitigation, helped develop the Marine Mammal Observation Communications Protocol, which is based on in situ monitoring and real-time communication of the presence of cetaceans within 5 different ranges. And last year alone, we did 1,300 nautical miles at sea with over 380 hours dedicated to the active watch during the operations. We look for these medium-sized cetaceans, but also for the super small, which means we have to have good sea conditions. And when we don't, we are able to relay that information directly to those who are enacting the operations by the Department of National Defense. We've also had the pleasure of working with the Pachidat First Nation in Western and Central Juan de Fuca Strait on a multi-species research program. This is a collaboration between Pachidat First Nation, SMRU Consulting, Port of Vancouver Echo Program, and CView, which is where I work. Dr. Dom Tollett and I developed this line transect survey, which extends through Central and Western Juan de Fuca Strait. And just very quickly, you can see here, lots of purple humpbacks, a few of those medium-sized cetaceans in red, but very importantly, those glowing yellow sunshine orbs of harbor porpoise distributed along the shoreline, again, moving into those very, very near-shore habitats. SMRU Consulting developed this sightings kernel density map based on 2021, and we can see the hotspots. When we compared it with including the 2020 data, we can see that we get a hotspot out towards the western entrance. So just very quickly to finish up, we've got the International Save the Vaquita Day. We were able to have it again this year, which means vaquita still exist. And it was during this event that I had one of those light bulb moments when Dr. Lorenzo Rojas Bracho was talking, and he was saying, one of the fundamental aspects of vaquita conservation and why we have failed this species is because we are not treating this as a financial crime. That got me thinking. All of the work that we've been doing with China and here in British Columbia has been based on collaboration, communication, and trust between all parties because we have only one planet and we are working together, and this triangle works. When it falls apart, it doesn't work. And I can tell you for sure that we are failing vaquita. Looking at these 10 trusts, which I will not read, but just let you go through them yourself, learning from those who have extensive experience with these very complicated conservation situations, the single most important thing that we have to have is trust. And there are these 10 trusts that Jane Goodall and Mark Beckhoff have put out. And we can trust that the nets are still in the Sea of Cortez. We can also trust that the vaquita, based on the last scientific expedition, still have calves. We also know from the scientific research, looking at the genetics, that there is still hope that this population, this species, could come back from very low numbers. It will take a global village to save this species, and given that their range is less than 1/1000th of the Earth's ocean surface, perhaps we can do something just a little bit different so that we don't continue to fail this species. And because they still exist, we are taking a socioeconomic approach because this is not a science problem. Science has identified the problem, and the tremendous work of many of the scientists in both Mexico and the United States has got us to this point. But we have recognized we have a socioeconomic problem. So we are building a collaborative group between Dr. Samuel Turvey at the Zoological Society of London, Dr. Tom Jefferson at Viva Vaquita, and those of us at the Porpoise Conservation Society to try a new approach, which is multidisciplinary, that will take place in the immediate, medium, and long-term timeframes. But this really is our last chance. We are down to approximately 10 to 20 animals for the entire population. So I would say, many people would say, well, these are super small cetaceans. I would perhaps call them super small cetaceans, because they really are. We do have these medium-sized superstars. They're all important, all definitely part of our ecosystem. And if we look at the United Nations, life below water, we have to conserve and we have to sustainably use, because for our future explorers, is this really what we want them to see? Or would we rather that they see vaquita? And just in closing, I thought it was interesting that this book is closing with a coda, which those of us in marine mammal biology and acoustics think of Watkins and Shovel 1977 using a coda to describe the sperm whale clicks. But it is, in fact, also the last piece, the last event can be used in closing. And this book closes with, after all is said and done, science is betrayal. So we continue to spread the word about these super small cetaceans. The harbor porpoise, you can purchase this new book. It's on Amazon. And that is Jack from the Vancouver Aquarium, gracing the front cover. Of course, we always have to say, adopt a porpoise, because you too can live your life with a porpoise. I'm not sure what's happened to the fonts there. And all of this is collaborative. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you.
Okay, questions while we're setting up for the next speaker? Oh, go.
Are there any indications main vaquita are managing to learn to avoid nets at all?
Yes, so that's an excellent question. And in fact, the answer is yes. I've had many people say to me, just give up. This is a doomed species. Put your efforts elsewhere. But what we do know about the vaquita that we have seen in the Sea of Cortez is some of them do have net entanglement marks, and they have survived, which means we have the survivors. And so our work is continuing for those individuals.
That's going to be it. Thanks, Anna.